Intimacy, sensate without touching. When you are deeply felt, but never physically held. There are lovers who can read you without a word. They notice the micro shift in your breath when something's wrong, sense your mood before you've named it, feel the temperature of your spirit as you enter a room. They are emotionally vivid, perceptive, present, powerfully tuned in. They see all of you, but they rarely reach for you, rarely offer a hand, a hug, a brush of skin. You are known profoundly so. But you are not touched, and slowly that absence becomes a wound too quiet to name. At first, this kind of intimacy feels profound. You're in conversation, and they notice the moment you drift. They say you're somewhere else, what's on your mind? You soften. You feel seen, but they don't take your hand. They don't pull you close. Their attention is a gaze, never a gesture. Their empathy fills the air, but your body remains untouched, hovering in a strange kind of closeness that lacks anchor. Sometimes they're even deeply emotionally available. They listen when you speak, they remember the details, they're attuned, they hold your heart in every way. But your back has never been rubbed after a long day. Your face has never been cupped in stillness. You begin to feel like a spirit floating beside someone, not a body beside a body. The relationship is soulful, but ungrounded. There's the partner who tells you everything, shares vulnerability, emotion, depth. You lie next to them in bed, conversations blooming into the dark. But you're on your own sides. Your fingers never find each other under the covers. You're mentally entwined, but physically apart. And at some point, your body starts to grieve what your mind cannot compensate for. The absence of touch starts to scream inside the presence of connection. Sometimes it's practical. I'm just not a physical person, they say. Or, I didn't grow up in a touchy household. You understand. You try to honor it, but your skin still misses theirs. Your body still aches in small, quiet ways even you struggle to justify. Because you are loved, deeply, but not held. And no amount of emotional closeness replaces the feeling of being physically gathered. Then there's the intimacy that almost bridges the gap. They reach toward you when you cry, but stop short of the embrace. They sit close when you're tired, but don't lean in. You feel the intention, but not the contact. And that almost love begins to bruise, because what you needed wasn't just to be read, it was to be wrapped in something. Over time, a strange dissonance forms. They say, I feel you so much, and you nod. But inside, your body is starving for a touch on the lower back, a hand on the knee, a thumb across the cheekbone. You begin to feel like a painting they admire but never dare to touch. Like your physical presence is seen but never joined. Sometimes the lack of touch is accidental. They love you, they're emotionally expressive, but they just don't think to reach. They don't know that you need skin, not just sight, that you need to be gathered, not just gazed at. You begin to teach them gently, but it feels awkward. You feel selfish for wanting something so simple. You start shrinking your need instead of asking for it, and that shrinking leaves an imprint long after the conversations are over. The most piercing wounds come when you finally name it. I want you to touch me more. And they look at you like they've failed, or worse, like they don't understand. They tell you, but I'm always here. I always listen. And you realize they equate intimacy with attention, not with presence. They feel close, but you feel cold. And that difference becomes a quiet distance neither of you has language for. These are the wounds of being emotionally naked but physically untouched, of being fully seen but never fully held, of having your soul mirrored but your body left aching. You are not unloved, you are just unheld. And that paradox is one of the hardest to explain because everything seems intimate, except the one part that never lies, your skin. True sensate intimacy includes the body. It doesn't just feel for you, it reaches toward you. It knows that love is not only perception, it is gesture, it is hands, arms, lips, weight, warmth. Without touch, even the deepest awareness starts to feel hollow. Even the most sacred gaze begins to feel like light on glass. Because love, to be whole, must land somewhere. And sometimes, the only place it can truly land is your skin. She sits at the edge of the bed, face in her hands, the kind of quiet that says, don't talk, just hold me. He sees it. He always does. He walks into the room, kneels beside her and says, you're overwhelmed again, aren't you? She nods barely. He waits, but his hands never move. She aches for him to simply gather her, to touch her like she's still reachable. But instead, his presence stays cerebral, watchful but distant. Her body begins to learn he will always understand you, but he will never wrap around you. A man opens up for the first time in months. About stress, about failure, about shame he doesn't know how to speak aloud. His partner listens intently, eyes full of care. But she doesn't move closer, doesn't reach across the table, doesn't touch his wrist. His confession echoes in the space between them. She says all the right words, but he walks away feeling untouched, as if vulnerability was heard like a song on headphones, but never felt skin to skin. They've been together for years, emotionally fluent, intellectually in sync. But when she touches his arm in public, he pulls away instinctively. When she asks for a hug during conflict, he offers words instead. We'll get through this. She's not asking for hope, she's asking for contact. Her body has learned to wait, then to numb, then to stop asking. His perception is sharp, his love is real, but her body feels exiled from his version of closeness. Sometimes he stands behind her while she's doing dishes. He watches the way her shoulders rise and fall, how tired she looks. He says, "You've had a long day." She nods, hopes for his arms around her waist, hopes for his chest against her back. But he simply walks away. She stays still, water running, chest heavier than before. Because being seen, but not touched, teaches the heart something painful. Your pain matters, but not enough to be held. A woman gets dressed for a date night. She turns to her partner and says, "How do I look?" He smiles and says, "You look incredible," but he doesn't reach for her, doesn't trace the line of her arm or pull her close. She stands there, radiant and unreceived. Later, when they walk side by side, his hands stay in his pockets. She laughs louder than usual, trying to feel tethered, but she doesn't feel chosen, only observed. Sometimes, a partner offers every other kind of closeness. They talk for hours, listen deeply, remember every story. But the body never enters the room. No spontaneous touches, no hand on the back, no hand resting on the knee under the table. And over time, the absence of touch becomes deafening. The intimacy starts to feel cognitive, conceptual, beautiful, but weightless, like walking through a dream you can never fully wake into. Then there's the wound that forms slowly. The couple who used to kiss goodnight, hold hands during movies, touch each other in passing. Now, years in, the touches have faded, but not the care. They still love one another, still say so daily, still laugh, still support, but something physical has withered, and no one says it. No one reaches first. She begins to shrink from her own longing. He begins to assume she doesn't need it anymore. They're still connected, but their skin no longer remembers each other. A partner reaches for their lover during a hard conversation, not to fix, but to anchor. But their hand is met with stillness. The lover flinches subtly, or freezes, or says, "I need space," again and again, and slowly the hand stops reaching. Not because the love is gone, but because it feels unwelcome. The one who once reached now waits. And in that waiting, love starts to ache like something untouchable. And perhaps the deepest kind of heart wound, when you are known in your soul, but starved in your skin. When someone holds your stories, but never your hands. When they love your tears, but never wipe them. When you are their confidant, their mirror, their home, but not their embrace. You begin to wonder if you're too much for touch, or not enough. You begin to think of affection like a language you forgot how to speak. Or worse, one they never learned how to translate from knowing into gesture. These are the wounds of being loved without being reached for, of having emotional richness without physical refuge, of being deeply known but never drawn into the warmth of someone's hands, someone's lap, someone's arms. Because touch isn't extra. It isn't decoration. It is translation. It is love made tactile. Without it, even the most emotionally intelligent connection starts to float, unanchored, disembodied, and quietly aching. You may be loved in heart, admired in mind, but your body, your living, longing body, never gets to belong. Intimacy, sensate without kindness, when you are seen and heard, but not held in care. There is a kind of intimacy that comes through intense attention, eye contact that pierces, voices that echo deeply, the way someone studies your every move, notices the tiniest changes in your expression, remembers what you wore, what you said, what you did. It feels immersive, magnetic, even electric. But when that sensory presence is not anchored in kindness, it becomes something else entirely. It shifts from intimacy to surveillance, from connection to control. You are perceived, but not protected. Sensate intimacy without kindness means someone may hear your every word, but not with compassion. They may remember what you said weeks ago and bring it up, but only to correct you or prove you wrong. Their attention is sharp, but it wounds. Their gaze lands heavily, not as comfort, but as weight. You feel watched, not witnessed, measured, not met. Sometimes it begins as flattery. They notice everything: the way you sip your coffee, the way you part your hair, the rhythm of your voice. You feel seen, even adored. But soon, the same perceptiveness becomes criticism. You always do that thing with your mouth when you lie, or you didn't sound happy for me earlier. You realize their sensitivity isn't for your safety, it's for their interpretation. You're not being sensed with empathy, you're being scanned. This kind of attention can feel emotionally exhausting. You walk into a room and feel them track your mood before you've spoken. They ask questions you didn't expect. Why are you quieter than usual? Or comment on your energy. You seem off today. It might seem caring, but when kindness is missing, these moments feel like emotional interrogation, not concern. Your inner world is constantly up for analysis, but never gently held. In some relationships, this dynamic emerges as hyper-attunement that turns cold. They smell the shift in your mood. They hear the tremor in your voice, but instead of softening, they use it to blame. "You're always so sensitive," they say, or "here we go again." Their ability to notice your emotional signals becomes a weapon. You are perceived precisely, but not lovingly. And over time, your nervous system starts to brace when they notice, because their noticing doesn't lead to care, it leads to critique. There are partners who will hear every word, catch every nuance, smell every emotional storm before it arrives, but when it does, they withdraw, or judge, or offer logic instead of love. They are sensory intelligent, but emotionally unkind, and the pain of that is deep. Your vulnerability is picked up like a radio signal, but never held like a sacred truth. You feel open, but not safe. Exposed, but not embraced. Sometimes the attention becomes possessive. They notice who you're texting, the shift in your scent when you return home, the delay in your replies. They're attentive to every sensory cue, but the kindness behind it has been replaced by fear, jealousy, or control. It starts to feel like being loved under a microscope. You are hyperseen, but not gently regarded. The intimacy becomes an atmosphere of tension, not trust. Then there's the heartache of being deeply felt, but never softened into. You talk about your grief, your doubt, your desire. They lean in, they hear every word. They even reflect it back with astonishing clarity. But there's no warmth, no "I'm here with you." Only an intellectual presence, a sensory engagement that remains emotionally sterile. You may feel understood, but not loved. Your pain is witnessed, but left alone in the room. And perhaps the most confusing dynamic, they make you feel deeply seen, fully heard, but they use what they see to maintain their power. They bring up your fears in fights. They mimic your vulnerability when they want something. They know how to read your energy, but instead of offering peace, they manipulate. You were open through sensory intimacy, but then abandoned in it. Or worse, turned against. Over time, this leaves a wound that's hard to name. You stop wanting to be looked at because their gaze doesn't soothe. You stop speaking freely because your words become ammunition. You begin to fear emotional intimacy because every time you've let someone see that much of you, it wasn't met with kindness. It was met with something colder, sharper, and more exacting than you were ready for. Sensate without kindness is intimacy stripped of empathy. It's being seen, heard, and known, but not cherished. It's being studied without being protected. And it creates a loneliness so particular, so piercing, that even the most attentive lover can leave you feeling completely alone. True sensory intimacy doesn't just perceive. It softens. It listens with care. It gazes with humility. It remembers with reverence. It doesn't just pick up on who you are. It cradles that knowledge like something precious. Without kindness, attention becomes intrusion. But with kindness, it becomes sanctuary. A place where your deepest expressions are not just registered, but received with grace. She speaks with trembling honesty one night, admitting something raw. "I feel insecure when you talk about your ex." He listens carefully, nods, hears the shift in her voice, the hesitation in her breath. Then he says, You always get weird about that stuff. You're too sensitive. The sensory detail was there. He noticed everything. But his response was devoid of kindness. Her vulnerability is filed away like a fact, not cradled like a truth. And as she sits quietly beside him, something hardens inside, a vow not to share like that again. A man shares the story of his childhood trauma for the first time. His partner listens, eyes locked on his, nodding, asking gentle questions. He feels opened, exposed, but in a way that feels reverent. Until later, during an argument, she says, "You always do this. Retreat into your wounded little boy." The wound is instant, deep. She remembered every detail, every tremor of that night, but she used it as a weapon. Her sensory intimacy did not protect him. It pierced him, and that betrayal was sharper than silence ever could have been. She's getting dressed for an event, and he compliments her. "You look amazing, but I liked how you wore your hair last time. It framed your face better." He means well, perhaps. He's noticing, paying attention, but his words sting, because what she needed was warmth, not comparison. Affirmation, not refinement. His attention lands like a cold cloth across her fire, and while she still lets him help zip her dress, a small piece of her excitement dims. She was seen, but not cherished. He always knows when her mood changes. She doesn't have to say a word. He picks up on the quiet, the stillness in her shoulders, the way she blinks slower when she's overwhelmed. He says, "You're upset, aren't you?" But when she nods, ready to open up, he sighs. "I just wanted a normal night." His sensory radar is sharp, but his heart doesn't open. It recoils. She begins to wish he didn't notice at all, because being perceived but not cared for feels like being emotionally naked in a room that turns its back. Sometimes it happens slowly. A partner begins to anticipate your preferences, your coffee order, the way you like your socks folded, the music that calms you. At first, it feels like love, thoughtful, precise. But over time, they begin to correct you when you change. You never used to listen to this kind of music. You always wanted oat milk. The perception becomes rigidity. Their version of you, locked in sensory memory, begins to take precedence over your becoming. And so, you feel suffocated by their attentiveness. Loved for who you were, not who you are now. A woman cries one night, vulnerable and cracked open. Her partner touches her shoulder, strokes her hair, speaks softly, but he doesn't say, "That must be hard," or "I'm with you." Instead, he says, "You always do this when you're tired, it'll pass." He's tracking her patterns, her rhythms, but he's not with her in it. She feels analyzed, not accompanied. And so, even as his hands offer comfort, her heart feels untouched, like she is an emotional map being studied, not a person being held. In some relationships, your feelings are echoed back to you, every word remembered, every signal mirrored, but there's no warmth underneath it. You cry and they say, "You're overwhelmed." You say you feel lost and they reply, "You've said that before." Everything is observed, cataloged, labeled, but never met with care. You feel like a case study, like an emotional landscape under surveillance. And over time, you begin to grieve, not just the absence of love, but the presence of attention without affection. Another kind of wound is born when sensory closeness becomes control. A partner who notices your tone of voice, the subtle shift in your energy, then says, "You're pulling away from me, aren't you?" You deny it, because it's not true, or maybe it is, and you're not ready to speak it. But their perception pins you down. You begin to feel emotionally hunted, caught before you even know what you feel. That kind of closeness doesn't feel safe. It feels invasive. It's not love, it's possession disguised as intimacy. And perhaps the most insidious pain of all, when you are truly seen, your emotional layers reflected back with precision, but the person who sees you doesn't love what they find. They tell you, directly or not, that you are too much, that your depth is exhausting, that your complexity is inconvenient. And even though they keep watching, listening, noticing, you begin to wish they'd stop. Because being studied and subtly rejected is worse than being overlooked. It teaches you that to be known is to be burdensome. These are the wounds of Sensate without kindness, where every look feels like a scan, every word feels weighed, every mood is noticed, but none of it is met with warmth, softness, or safety. You are deeply perceived, but never gently received, and that absence becomes a slow-burning ache, not because you are unloved, but because you are too known to be misunderstood and still left unheld. Intimacy, sensate without activity. when you are deeply perceived but not walked with. There are relationships where you are exquisitely seen. They notice how your voice changes when you're tired, how your eyes shift when you're holding back emotion. They pick up on your routines, your preferences, the exact way your fingers fidget when you're nervous. You are heard, felt, smelled, remembered, in full sensory color. But if you suggest doing something together, trying something new, stepping into your world, meeting you in action, they hesitate. Or they say, "You go ahead." Or they change the subject. You are intimately perceived but not joined. This is the quiet ache of sensate without activity, where you are known deeply but never accompanied. At first, it seems like love. They remember your favorite tea, send playlists tailored to your moods, quote things you've said back to you with near-perfect recall. You feel seen, and in many ways you are. But when you say, "Come with me to this event," or "Let's try that together," their presence evaporates. They're full of attention but empty of participation. And slowly, you begin to feel like a character they're studying, one they admire, even adore, but from the outside. Sometimes it shows up as praise. You mention an idea, a new practice, or a creative spark, and they light up. They say, "That's so you," or "You're incredible." They truly mean it, but they never ask, "Can I come see it?" or "How can I be part of that?" Their sensory presence touches you in words, in eye contact, in physical affection, but never in lived motion. And eventually, the intimacy starts to feel weightless, beautiful, but floating just out of reach. You may find yourself doing things on your own, not by choice, but by pattern. You attend workshops, pursue your hobbies, explore places, initiate adventures. They always listen when you return. They want to hear all about it. They notice your excitement, even celebrate it. But they remain still. At first, it feels supportive. Later, it starts to feel like solitude in disguise. It becomes especially painful when their sensory presence keeps pace with your inner world, but not your outer one. They can tell you're off before you say a word. They hold you when you cry. They know your internal rhythms better than anyone, but they never go on the journey with you. You read a life-changing book, and they nod when you share, but never read it themselves. You start a passion project, and they smile warmly, but never show up to witness it. They're close to your feelings, distant from your living. Sometimes it becomes a kind of emotional audience. They perceive your moods, your shifts, your needs, but their role is to observe, not participate. You start to feel like your world is a stage, and they are the silent, devoted watcher. And while part of you is grateful to be seen so fully, another part begins to ache. Will you ever stand beside me on the path, or will you always love me from the side of the road? Then there's the confusion that sets in. You feel emotionally naked around them. They hear your sighs, notice the change in your walk, the meaning behind your pauses. And yet, they never offer to join you. Not on the hike, not in the studio, not in the planning, the creating, the becoming. You begin to question, how can someone see me so well and still not move with me? Eventually, the imbalance becomes isolating. Your partner touches you every morning, comments on how your voice sounds brighter, smiles when your energy is high. But when you say, "Let's start that project we always talked about," or "Join me at this gathering," they decline. Lovingly, kindly, repeatedly. You stop inviting, you stop expecting. They still sense your joy, your longing, your subtle shifts, but they only ever watch your life from the porch. The wound here isn't about neglect, it's about non-joining. You are known in emotion, in energy, and preference, but your world remains yours alone. They hold your hand while you talk about your dreams, but they never walk into them with you. And you start to feel like a beautiful painting they admire, never a path they travel. True intimacy isn't just knowing how someone feels, it's choosing to step into their world, to say, "I want to experience this with you," to turn toward not just the heart, but the life. Because perception without participation creates a relationship that is emotionally rich, but experientially empty. To be sensate with someone is to honor their presence. To be active with them is to honor their movement. Love is not only what we notice, it's what we show up for. Without that, even the most sensitive love can feel distant, touching all the right notes, but never dancing to the rhythm. He senses when her mood shifts the moment she walks into the room. He turns down the music before she even speaks, brings her a glass of water, sits beside her without asking. She looks at him and says, "I feel like I'm drifting. I want to try something new. Maybe take a class, go dancing again." He nods. "If that makes you happy, go for it." His tone is warm. His attention is real. But she hears the subtext, "I won't be going with you." And later, when she's on the dance floor alone, a deep sadness creeps in. Not from being unsupported, but from being unaccompanied. A man starts painting again after years. His partner notices the change immediately, how his voice gets lighter, how he hums while cooking now, how his eyes carry a spark she hasn't seen in a while. She tells him, "You're different," in a good way. But when he invites her to his first art show, she declines. "You'll be great. I just don't do crowds." He understands. But standing there alone, surrounded by strangers and paint, he realizes she sees his joy. She names it, but she doesn't join it. Her attention lives in his emotions, not in his life. There's a woman who begins running early in the mornings. Her partner, still half asleep, listens to her describe the sunrise, the meditative silence, the way she feels like she's reclaiming her body. He smiles, kisses her shoulder, and says, "You're glowing lately." But when she asks if he'd ever join her, even once, he shrugs. "That's your thing." She nods, and the next morning laces her shoes with a quiet ache. She's not asking for him to run. She's asking for him to move with her, just once. Just enough to not feel alone in her becoming. Sometimes the absence arrives in small invitations. A book she wants to read together, a podcast she hopes to discuss, a walk around a new neighborhood. And he always says, "You go ahead." Never with malice, always with love. But she begins to feel like her world is something he's content to observe from the edges. Her memories start to split. One set she shares with him, one set she creates alone. He still senses her emotions, but he's no longer part of their origin story. Then there's the man who finally opens up about his desire to reconnect with old friends, to travel, to see more of life. His partner listens, genuinely engaged. She says, "That's so good for you," but never asks, "Can I come too?" When he goes, he sends her pictures, stories, laughter, and messages. She replies with affection, encouragement, love. But when he returns, he feels something missing between them. Like he lived something beautiful that she held at arm's length. And it hurts more than if she hadn't cared at all. A woman performs in a small community play after months of rehearsals. Her partner sees how excited she is. He's held her through auditions, made space for her nerves. But on the night of the performance, he texts, "I'm proud of you. Let me know how it goes." She still feels the echo of his voice in her head when she's backstage. But when the curtain falls and he isn't there, the absence lands heavier than silence. His sensory presence could name every shift in her stress. But when it mattered most, he didn't step into it with her. There are couples who share deep physical connection. One partner always knows when the other is tense, sad, lit up. They touch often, hold each other through hard days. But when asked to do something outside of the known, something playful, adventurous, out in the world, the answer is always no. And eventually, the relationship becomes a tender room with no door. A place full of emotion, but void of shared motion. You are touched, held, emotionally seen. But your life is being lived beside them, not with them. Then comes the moment you stop asking. You still talk about your passions, you still share your world, but you don't expect them to show up in it anymore. You've learned the line. They will meet your feelings, but not your footsteps. You bring home your stories, they listen well, but the quiet grows louder, because you're tired of turning your life into a report. You don't want to be witnessed. You want to be met. And perhaps the deepest cut, when someone sees every nuance of who you are, celebrates your fire, your rhythm, your emotional palette, and yet never once steps into the dance with you. You begin to feel like an exhibit they love visiting, but not a world they want to inhabit. You are praised, admired, observed, but your journey is yours alone, and the one who seems closest to your soul never really walks the road with you. These are the wounds of emotional closeness without experiential commitment, of being felt but not followed, of having your inner world held tenderly while your outer world unfolds in solitude. It's not cold, it's not cruel, it's just unjoined. And it leaves behind a strange, quiet heartbreak, being deeply loved in stillness, but never chosen in motion. Intimacy, sensate without growth. When you are deeply seen, but not allowed to change. There are relationships where you are deeply seen, your habits noticed, your moods tracked, your patterns remembered with almost reverent precision. They know the cadence of your laugh, the hesitation in your voice when you're anxious, the way your body curls inward when you feel ashamed. You are felt in every room. Their attention is real, even touching. But if you begin to change, if your interests evolve, if your emotional palette deepens, if your direction shifts, they resist. And suddenly, all that sensory intimacy becomes a container, a mirror that no longer reflects who you're becoming, but who you used to be. This is the quiet ache of sensate without growth. When someone perceives you perfectly, but only as you were, it often feels like flattery at first. They notice your rituals, the way you stir your tea, the exact moment you need space, the kind of music that makes your eyes soften. They say things like, "No one knows you like I do." And they mean it. But then you mention something new. Perhaps you're thinking of moving cities, or you've started reading books they've never seen you interested in. Their eyes narrow slightly. They say, "That's not really you." And suddenly, all that loving observation starts to feel like surveillance. Sometimes the dissonance is softer, but no less painful. You express something raw, perhaps that you no longer enjoy the career you once loved, or that you're questioning your spiritual path. They don't argue, but their response lands hollow. "You'll come back around," they say with a half smile, as if your growth is a phase, a mood, something to wait out. You realize they've stopped really listening. Their perception is stuck in the version of you they prefer. And so begins the subtle imprisonment. You are seen, but not re-seen. Your changing interests are noted, but gently dismissed. Your desire for new conversations, new challenges, new expressions of self are met with affectionate confusion. "You used to love this," they say when you hesitate to go along with familiar routines. You did, but you've shifted. And now their closeness feels like a binding, tender, but unmoving. In some relationships, this dynamic goes unspoken for years. One partner remains rooted in their understanding of the other's past desires, favorite meals, sensory preferences, and they continue offering love based on that. They still play the same music you once danced to, still buy the same candles, still make the same kinds of jokes. And while part of you is touched by the memory, another part aches to be met now, as you are. Not as a nostalgia project, it becomes more painful when your evolving self is met with subtle resistance. You change your style, experimenting with bolder clothes or less makeup or a different energy, and they say, "You don't look like you anymore." It's not said harshly, but the undertone is clear. "I miss the version of you that made me comfortable." They still watch you, still reach for your hand, still say you're beautiful, but you start to feel as though you're loved through old eyes. Sometimes your attempts at growth trigger their fear. You begin healing something old, setting boundaries, speaking more directly, becoming clearer in your desires. And now their sensory attunement shifts. They pick up on your change in tone, your increase in assertiveness, but instead of celebrating it, they tense. They say, "You seem different lately," but not with wonder, with worry. And the message is unspoken but unmistakable. "Your growth unsettles me. I don't know how to feel you anymore. Please return to your previous self." Even physical intimacy starts to shift. They still know what your body responds to, but not what your soul needs now. They sense your breath catch, your shoulders soften, your eyes close, but they haven't asked, "What does this version of you desire?" They may still please your body, but they don't ask what touches you're becoming. The sensual memory remains, but the emotional presence doesn't evolve with it. Eventually, the pain compounds. You feel exposed but unseen, touched but not explored. You're no longer afraid of being invisible. You're afraid of being fixed in place, of being known so well that you no longer have room to unfold. You want to scream, "I'm not a snapshot, I'm still developing." But the love around you doesn't know how to make space for motion. It clings to the beauty of who you were. This is the wound of being frozen in affection, of having your nervous system mirrored while your soul goes unmet, of being deeply sensed, but only on the frequency of your past self. True sensory intimacy doesn't just track you, it evolves with you. It asks, "Who are you now?" as often as it says, "I remember who you were." It listens with fresh ears, looks with new eyes, and doesn't flinch when you outgrow the shelf they lovingly placed you on. Because to love you through the senses is sacred, but to keep loving you as you grow, that's what makes intimacy real. That's when attention becomes devotion, when knowing becomes wonder. She sits across from him at a quiet dinner, nervously sharing that she's thinking about leaving her corporate job to start her own business. Her voice wavers with excitement and fear. He listens, watches her carefully, catches the gleam in her eyes, the way her hands move faster when she's passionate. Then he smiles and says, "But you've always been the stable one. That's what I love about you." It sounds like a compliment, but she hears it for what it is. A request to stay the same. She feels known, but only in the version of her he's already accepted. Her future self has no place to land. A man starts therapy and slowly begins speaking more vulnerably, more emotionally. He shares his fear of failure, his longing to be truly seen. His partner notices. She listens attentively, nods, even mirrors his words back to him. But when he starts weeping one night, really weeping, she goes still, then touches his arm and whispers, "You're not like this. You're my strong one." He realizes she can observe his feelings, but not receive his transformation. The intimacy he thought they had now feels like a box with velvet lining. Beautiful, but still a box. She's always been the quiet one, the listener, the soft one. Her partner knows this. He senses her moods before she speaks them, finishes her sentences, notices every small shift in her energy. But then she begins to speak up more. She says no when she used to say yes. She disagrees where she used to nod. And though he still listens, he sighs more now, touches her less, says things like, "I miss how gentle you used to be." She is still being seen, but her growth is landing like friction, not beauty. And it breaks something in her, because the love that once celebrated her softness now punishes her strength. A woman discovers a deep interest in spiritual practice. She begins meditating, spending weekends at workshops, pulling inward in a way she's never done before. Her partner is deeply sensate. He notices how her body relaxes after long silences, hears the cadence of her voice shift as she changes. But instead of meeting her with curiosity, he teases, "You're getting all floaty on me. I liked you better when you were grounded." He sees the surface, but not the soul, and she begins to feel like her transformation is something she must hide. Even from the one who claims to know her best. Then there's the man who starts working on his boundaries, saying no, being more direct, pulling back from people-pleasing. His partner senses it immediately. She picks up on the difference in his tone, the tension in his shoulders. She asks questions. "Are you pulling away?" But when he explains, she gets quiet, withdraws touch. She can sense the new him, but she doesn't want him. He feels emotionally naked in front of someone who still sees him, but doesn't choose him anymore. That's the most painful kind of knowing. Sometimes it happens in joy. You grow, change, become more radiant, and the person who once saw your smallest flickers can no longer meet your fire. They see the glow, but instead of stepping closer, they dim the room. They say things like, "Don't get too full of yourself," or "You've changed a lot." They still hug you, still look into your eyes, still reach for your hand, but you feel their hands holding the old you, even as the new you blooms. And you start to wonder if you have to stay small to keep being loved. There are moments where your growth becomes emotional static to them. You try to share something new, an insight, a shift, a dream. They nod, they're listening, but their eyes are seeing someone else, the version of you they've locked into memory. You finish your sentence. They say something loving, familiar, comforting, but completely misaligned with where you are now. You realize they're not talking to you anymore. They're talking to who you used to be. In some relationships, the other person's perception is so detailed, so finely tuned, that it starts to feel like pressure. You wear something different, they notice. Change your routine, they ask questions, not because they're curious, but because it breaks their rhythm of knowing you. Their sensory intimacy becomes a quiet cage. You are not allowed to evolve without triggering discomfort, so you stop evolving out loud, and eventually you stop altogether. And perhaps the most tender, confusing wound, when someone sees your growth, understands it intellectually, but doesn't walk with it emotionally. They say, "I know this is important to you," but they don't come to your event. They say, I see you changing, but they never ask how it feels. They mirror your journey without joining it. And so you feel like a documentary they're watching, not a person they're walking beside. This is the wound of being sensed but not supported, of being emotionally mapped with accuracy but not followed with love. You are not unseen, you are held in place. And over time, the one who is perceived so thoroughly begins to disappear, not out of neglect, but out of longing to be met in the new places their spirit wants to go. True sensate intimacy must move. It must track not just the flicker of a smile or the weight of a sigh, but the direction of the soul. Because if it doesn't, attention becomes anchoring. And perception, without presence in our evolution, turns intimacy into a frame that can only ever hold the past. Intimacy, sensate without allowance. When you are deeply felt, but not given room to be. Some of the most disorienting wounds in love don't come from absence, but from too much closeness without freedom. When someone sees you, hears you, smells the change in your breath, notices every flicker in your tone, they are sensate, attuned, alert. But when they use that awareness to shape, contain, or control you, rather than to support and allow you, intimacy turns from connection into quiet suffocation. This is the heartbreak of sensate without allowance, when you are deeply perceived but not permitted. It often looks like love. They know exactly when you're off before you've spoken. They ask questions like, are you okay? Or you seem different today. Their attention feels like care, until it becomes a pattern. If you don't answer the right way, they retreat, or worry, or escalate. And slowly, your feelings stop being yours. They become data they manage. You're no longer just feeling, you're being read. Sometimes they are exquisitely tuned to your rhythms. They know how you act when you're anxious, when you're withdrawn, when you need quiet. But instead of creating space for those moments, they move in closer, expecting you to explain, to shift, to self-regulate, so they can feel safe again. Their closeness starts to feel conditional. If I sense something is wrong, you must tell me. You must fix it. You must open. But there's no room to just be. A woman sits on the couch in silence, needing space. Her partner senses something's off and gently asks what's wrong. She says, nothing right now. I just need a little time. He frowns, touches her knee, waits. Minutes pass, then hours. His energy gets colder. That night he says, you shut me out today. She's confused. I just needed space. But his sensory perception came without allowance. His desire to know her feelings wasn't for her benefit. It was to soothe his discomfort. In another home, a man's partner notices every fluctuation in his mood. When he's off, she asks. When he's quiet, she touches. When he's lost in thought, she draws him in. But when he finally says, I don't want to talk, she becomes withdrawn, hurt, passive. He starts to realize her closeness was not entirely unconditional. It was sensory claiming, not relational freedom. Now, every time he wants solitude, he feels guilty, like he has to shrink his silence to stay lovable. There's the couple where one partner is deeply emotionally intelligent, always noticing, always naming, but that naming becomes a box. You're feeling this because of that thing from last year. Or I know you. You always do this when you're upset. Their insight stops being curiosity and becomes narrative. You are no longer becoming, you are defined. And being seen this clearly, yet this narrowly, becomes exhausting. You start to rebel, not from the relationship, but from the sense of being locked in someone else's perception. Sometimes the partner who senses you best is also the one who refuses to let you be in process. You say, I don't know what I'm feeling. They reply, yes, you do. I can see it. You say, I need to move through this in my own way. They interrupt, but I know what helps you. Let me in. What started as intimacy now feels like surveillance. You are over-understood. Their knowing of you has left no room for mystery, for your own unfolding. There's a woman who begins to grow, emotionally, spiritually, sexually. Her partner notices instantly. He picks up on the way she carries herself differently, the new edge in her laughter, the quieter moments of reflection. But instead of curiosity, he becomes uncomfortable. Jealous, possessive. He says, something's changing in you. I don't know if I like it. She feels exposed by someone who sees everything, but supported by none of it. His perception has no grace, no allowance, just the desire to keep her comprehensible. Another wound forms when one partner always senses tension before it can be named, but uses that as justification for emotional pressure. They say, "I know you're upset, so just tell me. Don't play games." The other partner isn't playing, they're processing. But their right to move through their own emotional rhythm is overridden. Being seen too soon, too sharply, without patience or softness, becomes its own form of emotional violation. You don't have the freedom to arrive at your truth. You're expected to declare it on someone else's timeline. And perhaps the deepest hurt is when your partner knows your entire nervous system, but doesn't make space for its changes. They sense everything, remember everything, reflect everything. But the moment you need to grow, to shift, to evolve in how you relate, they resist. That's not how you used to be. Their deep perception becomes a wall, not because they don't love you, but because they've confused being attuned with being in control. Sensate without allowance creates a suffocating kind of love, one where you are emotionally naked but never free, where your moods are mapped, your signals studied, your patterns memorized, but none of them are met with breath, with space, with let be, and eventually the person being watched, tracked, known, begins to disappear, not from lack of love, but from lack of room. True intimacy doesn't just see you, it lets you be. It holds its noticing with patience, not pressure. With softness, not certainty. It says, "I feel you, I see you, and I trust your timing." Because love that senses without suffocating is the love that lasts. The love that gives you not just attention, but air. She walks through the door after a long day, emotionally frayed and needing silence. He looks up from his book and immediately senses it. The tired curve of her shoulders, the dullness in her eyes. He sets the book down, approaches gently and says, "You're shutting down again, aren't you?" She pauses, not ready to explain. She nods faintly. But instead of retreating, he stands there, expectant, waiting for more. When she doesn't offer it, his energy cools. Later that night, he barely touches her. She feels the warmth disappear, not because she wasn't loved, but because she didn't unpack herself on demand. A man sits quietly at breakfast, eyes distant. His partner notices instantly, the way his spoon moves slower, the way he's blinking more often than usual. She leans in and says, "You're sad. I can feel it. What's going on?" He mumbles something vague. She pushes gently, "You always go silent when something's bothering you. I know this pattern." He sighs, not because she's wrong, but because her knowing doesn't leave space. He doesn't get to arrive at his truth. He's already been named. And slowly, her perception stops feeling like care. It starts to feel like surveillance dressed as closeness. There's the woman who's always been expressive, quick to share, quick to cry, easy to read. Her partner is tuned into her like a song. He knows every emotional cue, every shift. But when she starts practicing stillness, speaking less, needing space to process more privately, he struggles. He senses the change and says, "You've been off. You're not like you used to be." He means to reconnect, but instead, he reinforces the message, "I love you best when you're predictable." She feels his attention, but not his allowance. And that absence cuts deeper than silence. Another woman begins experimenting with boundaries, learning to say no, asking for emotional pacing. Her partner notices her change right away. "You used to be so open," he says. "Now I have to work harder to reach you." He says it with a smile, but there's weight behind the words. She realizes that his sensory attention wasn't neutral. It was rooted in how she once made herself available, always ready to be understood. Now that she's claiming a different shape, he's uncomfortable. She's still seen, but no longer welcomed. There's a man who comes home after visiting a dying parent. His partner sees it in his body, the grief he hasn't voiced yet. She approaches carefully and says, "You're carrying something heavy. I can feel it." He nods. She touches his shoulder and says, "You don't have to go quiet with me." Her words mean well, but they carry pressure, an expectation that being known means being emotionally available. He begins to feel like his silence is wrong, that even his processing is a disruption to the intimacy. And now he doesn't just carry grief, he carries guilt. Sometimes it's playful until it isn't. A partner teases, "You get that look when you're about to spiral." Or there's that sigh again, "You're stressed, aren't you?" It sounds familiar, intimate, but the repetition becomes a cage. Every emotion becomes labeled before it's lived. Every nuance becomes a pattern. every moment folded into their version of who you are. You start to feel like an open book being read aloud without consent, and the only way to reclaim your privacy is to close pages in their presence. Then there's the confusion that comes when someone gets it right, too soon. You begin to cry, and before you form the words, they say, "This is about your mom, isn't it?" They're not wrong, but you haven't found your way into the feeling yet. Their sensory sharpness becomes a shortcut through your process. And now, even though you're technically seen, you feel skipped, rushed into emotional exposure you weren't ready for. And what was once intimacy begins to feel invasive. Sometimes the wound comes not from their presence, but from what follows it. You say, "I'm overwhelmed," and they say, "I knew it," not "I'm here," not "What do you need?" But a declaration that reinforces their ability to read you. Their attunement becomes a badge, their accuracy a subtle boast. You stop feeling emotionally supported and start feeling emotionally interpreted. As though your inner world is no longer yours to walk through, it's already been mapped. And perhaps the most invisible wound, when your partner senses your changes, but subtly resists them. You say, "I don't feel like going out tonight," and they say, "You've been so different lately." They look at you the same. They touch you the same. But the energy has shifted. Their perception, once safe, now carries edge. You feel them tracking you not with wonder, but with worry. They aren't rejecting you outright, but they're no longer embracing who you're becoming. You're still perceived, but only under the condition that you don't stray too far from what's familiar. These are the wounds of being accurately seen but emotionally confined, of having your inner world studied without the freedom to move within it, of being read but not respected. Because without allowance, sensory intimacy becomes a cage of knowledge, where your thoughts are pre-read, your feelings pre-interpreted, your patterns pre-labeled. And you, the living person behind all of it, begin to fade beneath their version of who you are. True intimacy holds knowing lightly. It says, "I feel you, and I'll wait for you to invite me in." It doesn't name what you're feeling before you do. It doesn't close the distance with pressure. It holds space for your mystery, for your timing, for your self-choosing. Because love that sees without controlling isn't just intimate, it's sacred. It lets you breathe inside the attention. It gives you back to yourself. Intimacy, sensate without giving. When you are deeply noticed but rarely nourished. There is a form of intimacy that feels like devotion at first. A partner who watches you carefully, remembers the little things, anticipates your needs before you speak them. They know how your face falls when you're overwhelmed, how you hold your breath before you cry, the exact way your tone shifts when you're uncertain. You are deeply sensed, but if that awareness never turns into offering, if nothing is given in response, then intimacy starts to feel like performance. You are seen, but not supported, touched by their eyes, but not held by their hands. This is the quiet sorrow of sensate without giving. It often begins beautifully. They say things like, "I can tell you had a long day," or "You seem heavier today." You feel understood, maybe even cherished. But then nothing follows. No glass of water, no gentle question, no shoulder rubbed, no small kindness. Their attention ends with the sentence, and you're left in the spotlight of their perception, exposed, but still alone. You might be the one who cries, and they notice instantly. They say, "You're crying again. I knew this would hit you hard." But they don't move closer. They don't offer arms or comfort or words of reassurance. Their role is observation, not presence. Their intimacy is sensory, not actionable. And over time, you begin to feel like a feeling they're skilled at naming, but not one they're willing to tend. Sometimes they anticipate your stress with remarkable clarity. "You're probably anxious about tomorrow's meeting," they say. And they're right, but they don't lighten your load or offer to help prep or bring you tea. They just name it and move on. And slowly, the relationship starts to feel lopsided. They have the skill to track you, but not the heart to show up for you. Their love becomes a mirror, always reflecting, never reaching. There's the partner who always knows when you've had a bad day. They greet you with lines like, "You've got that look again," or "Let me guess, you're fried." But instead of helping, they use that awareness to excuse themselves. They go quiet. They take space. Or worse, they wait for you to self-soothe. Their sensory attunement becomes a shield. They see, so they don't have to respond. You are emotionally recognized, but practically untouched. This kind of intimacy can start to feel like emotional labor for the one being watched. Because if your partner sees your every need, but never lifts a finger to meet it, you begin to internalize the burden. You're aware that they know, and yet still, it's you who has to hold yourself together. It becomes a performance loop. They see, I suffer, I smile to make it easier. You are met by their gaze, but not by their hands, their time, their care. There's also the confusion of praise without action. They may say things like, "You're doing so much," or "I'm amazed by you," and yet never offer help. Never wash a dish. Never ask how they can take something off your plate. Their admiration floats like perfume, fragrant, fleeting. You smell the love, but you can't drink it. You begin to feel like a beloved statue, honored, noticed, but never nourished. Then there's the ache of intimacy and pain. You break down, unravel, admit something raw. They listen. They even reflect it back. I hear you. That must be hard. But they don't ask what you need. Don't make a single move toward comfort. You're emotionally read, but left alone in your ache. And that absence cuts deeper than being misunderstood, because it tells you, I see you, but I won't serve you. You may begin to feel guilty for wanting more. You might even say to yourself, at least they notice. That's more than most. But love that stays in the realm of perception and never drops into giving eventually feels ornamental. It feels like being watched through glass, admired, but untouchable, unmet. And sometimes the most painful part is this. They think they're doing enough. They believe their attunement is love. That naming your sadness should count as soothing it. That noticing your loneliness should somehow make it less. And so, when you finally say, I don't feel supported, they're shocked. They say, but I see you more clearly than anyone ever has. And you want to scream, then why am I still carrying all of it alone? These are the wounds of being emotionally recognized, but not received, of being tracked, but not touched, of being the subject of attention, but never the recipient of effort. It's not neglect. It's something subtler, a kind of love that hovers at the threshold of devotion, but never steps inside. True intimacy doesn't just notice you, it moves towards you. It turns perception into presence, noticing into nurturing, awareness into action. Because being deeply seen is beautiful, but being held because of it? That's where love begins to heal. She's standing in the kitchen, shoulders slumped, barely holding it together. He walks in, scans her for a second, and says gently, "You've had one of those days, haven't you?" She nods, eyes welling. He kisses the top of her head, murmurs, "I see you," and walks back to the living room. No hug, no offer to help, no questions. She finishes the dishes, crying quietly, feeling both seen and completely left alone. The wound? He noticed her pain, but didn't step in. She was acknowledged, but not cared for. A man sits on the edge of the bed, face buried in his hands. His partner watches him from across the room, says softly, "You're in your head again." He nods, doesn't speak. She knows that look. The furrowed brow, the shallow breath. She's right. But she stays there, frozen in her own discomfort. She doesn't come closer, doesn't offer touch or a listening ear. He feels exposed, but not held, known, but not carried. Eventually, he straightens up, says he's fine, and they both pretend her perception was enough. She's walking around with a heaviness that's become daily, overwork, underrest, stretched thin between responsibilities. He comments often, "You really need a break. You're going to burn out." He sees it, he names it, but he never offers to take anything off her plate, never picks up the errands, never makes dinner. She starts to feel like a documentary he narrates, but never participates in. She's living exhaustion. He's watching it. And the growing silence between them isn't from a lack of love, it's from a lack of relief. Sometimes he says all the right things. "You looked tired last night. I could tell you didn't sleep well. You're quieter lately." His attunement is precise, but it doesn't lead to action. He never follows up with, "Can I help?" or "What would feel good right now?" She starts feeling like a character in his internal emotional script, a part he observes with curiosity, not someone he supports with intention. The wound forms not from neglect, but from the absence of follow-through. She's seen, but never soothed. A man begins to talk about his fear of failing at work, how it's keeping him up at night. His partner nods, listening. She even mirrors his language back. So you feel like you're carrying too much. He feels heard, but not helped. She doesn't say, "How can I support you?" She doesn't even ask, "What do you need?" Just quiet nods. He starts to feel like his emotions are being filed rather than felt, like his pain is being watched, not walked with. Sometimes it's passive. He sees her struggling with her luggage, carrying groceries, trying to juggle too much. He smiles, says, "You're always doing the most," but doesn't step in. She's used to it by now, used to being admired but unsupported, used to being noticed, never lightened. Her body grows more tired, her spirit grows more resentful. His affection feels more and more like commentary than care. And even though he says he adores her strength, she starts to wonder if he only knows how to love her when she's doing it all alone. She opens up one evening about something deeply vulnerable, something that took courage to speak aloud. He listens attentively, nods, and says, "That must have been hard." She waits, for the embrace, for the gesture, for the question. But he shifts topics, not out of cruelty, but out of unawareness. She smiles through the disappointment, but the message has landed. Your emotional depth will be noted, not nurtured. Her willingness to be vulnerable shrinks a little more. There's the partner who always points out the subtle changes. You're not eating like you used to. You're pulling back again. You don't laugh like before. But never asks why, never asks how they can help. Their perception becomes like background music, present but emotionally inert. You start to feel like your life is being tracked on a screen, a series of signals noticed, cataloged, but never responded to. You are emotionally monitored, not emotionally met. And perhaps the deepest, most confusing heart wound, when someone truly sees you, sees your effort, your pain, your attempts to hold it all, and praises you. You're amazing. You're the strongest person I know. But never once steps in. Never once takes something off your plate. Never once matches their words with effort. Eventually, their admiration starts to sting, because it tells you they know what you're going through, and they're still letting you go through it alone. This is the wound of being beautifully seen but not practically loved, of being emotionally visible and still left carrying everything yourself. It's not that they don't care, it's that their caring stops at the level of noticing. And while that kind of intimacy can look impressive, even romantic, it slowly hollows out your trust. Because being deeply sensed without being deeply supported teaches your nervous system that love will always watch, but rarely walk with you. And love that only sees but never serves becomes a mirror you can't lean on when you fall. Intimacy, sensate without receiving, when you feel everything, but your love has nowhere to land. There are people who can read others like music. Every change in tone, every flicker of emotion, every unspoken shift in energy. They see your eyes before you speak, hear your sighs before you cry, sense your joy before you know it yourself. They are sensate in the deepest sense, attentive, responsive, emotionally awake. But if this ability to feel others is not met with an equal capacity to let themselves be felt, to receive, then intimacy becomes lopsided. You give and give, but your own vulnerability is buffered, deflected, or closed off. This is the quiet grief of sensate without receiving, when your love reaches out but finds no open door. It often begins in emotional generosity. You're the one who notices when they're quiet. You ask the questions, create the space, offer the softness. You track them with care, anticipate their inner world before they name it, and they're grateful. They say you're the most emotionally intelligent person they've known. But when you try to speak, to be seen, to be received, something closes. They nod but don't engage. They listen but stay on the surface. They respond but don't feel with you. And slowly it starts to hurt more to give than to stay silent. Sometimes you open up slowly. You speak a truth you've been holding. You say something like, "I've been feeling lonely even when we're together," or "I don't always know where I belong in your world." They pause, and instead of leaning in, they respond with, "That's not true," or "But look at everything I do." They heard the words, but not the heart. You feel exposed and untouched at the same time. The message is clear. You can sense them, but they can't hold you. There are partners who seem deeply connected, who mirror your emotions, track your patterns, even echo back your thoughts. But when you reach out physically, they tense. When you say, I need to feel closer, they freeze. They prefer to observe intimacy, not embody it. They're attuned, but not available. Present, but protected. You can feel everything with them, but not into them. And after a while, you begin to doubt your need to be received at all. A man plans a moment of emotional connection. He brings something meaningful, maybe a gift, maybe a gesture. His partner smiles, thanks him, but seems uncomfortable. Maybe she says, "You didn't have to," or "You're being too much today." The moment falls flat. He walks away feeling not rejected, but unseen. She's always sensitive, always warm, but only as the giver, not the receiver. His offering has no landing place. It's even more painful when vulnerability is returned with logic. You cry or confess or name a need, and instead of warmth, you get explanation. Well, that's because you were tired. Or it's probably just your anxiety. You're being interpreted, not felt. They know about you, but they don't join you. And you begin to feel emotionally documented, not emotionally held. Sometimes they say they want your love. They ask you to open up, but when you do, they minimize it, or retreat, or make it about them. You say, "I feel distant from you," and they reply, "Are you saying I'm not enough?" You offer intimacy, and they return defense. The very act of reaching toward them begins to feel like a risk you can't afford. Then there's the partner who deeply appreciates your ability to feel them, but never says thank you, never reflects it back, never turns their perception toward you. You start to feel like a vessel, pouring out constantly. Not because they're withholding, but because they don't know how to open. They say, "You're so good at this," but never learn how to meet you halfway. Over time, your capacity becomes a burden, their resistance, a wall. And perhaps the hardest wound, when someone receives your touch, your presence, your energy, but never lets it move them. You bring sweetness. They smile but stay unchanged. You offer support. They accept but never soften. You love deeply, and it lands then slips. You feel like you're loving into fog. Everything you give is felt, but not absorbed, not metabolized. And so you're left wondering, how much love do I have to give before I feel it move between us? These are the wounds of loving someone who is present but unavailable, of offering emotional resonance to someone who cannot or will not let it register, of being a mirror, a healer, a deep listener, and never being mirrored in return. You are attuned to their storms, their quiets, their longings. But when you ask to be seen, you are gently turned away. True intimacy isn't just about knowing another. It's about letting yourself be known, letting the love come in, not just go out. It's about meeting, not just with attention, but with reception. Because love that cannot receive is a door that's always slightly cracked, never open. And no matter how sensitive you are, how deeply you feel them, without receiving, there can be no shared intimacy. Only the echo of love returning to you from a place it was never allowed to enter. She brings her partner a poem, something she wrote late one night, raw and trembling. She reads it aloud, voice soft, eyes flicking upward with hope. He listens, smiles, says, "That was beautiful," and kisses her cheek. Then he walks away. She stands there, holding the weight of what she just shared, feeling like he applauded the shape of her heart, but didn't hold it. The words were received politely, but not emotionally entered. And that ache stays, because what she offered wasn't beauty, it was her. A man spends weeks preparing something thoughtful, a playlist of songs that remind him of their story. He sends it one night with a quiet message. "These are the moments where I loved you even more." She responds with "cute" and a heart emoji. He tells himself it's fine, but later he plays one of the songs alone in his car and realizes she heard it, but she didn't feel it. He's not wounded by her disinterest. He's wounded by her inability to let it matter. Sometimes the pain is disguised as gratitude. You reach out, touch their hand, tell them something deeply honest. "I feel safest with you." They smile, squeeze your fingers, say that means a lot. But the moment passes too quickly. They don't slow down. They don't turn towards you with anything vulnerable in return. You gave something sacred, and they placed it gently in a drawer, not because they didn't care, but because they didn't know how to open the gift. You bring up your grief, your fear, your longing. They say, "I know that about you," but they don't sit with it. They don't ask a deeper question. They don't lean in. It's like they're referencing a file you once gave them, not meeting you in the moment where it still hurts. You feel cataloged, not comforted. And the intimacy becomes historical, something they understand, but no longer join. Sometimes you offer joy, something you've created, discovered, reclaimed, and they smile, nod, say they're proud of you. But they stay on the edge of it. They don't step into your excitement. Don't ask to be part of it. You feel like a movie they liked but didn't finish. You begin to fear that everything you bring will be noticed, but not felt. And that fear becomes a wedge between your heart and your voice. You try again. You make dinner, light candles, create space. You reach across the table, ask gently, "What's been living inside you lately?" They answer factually, neatly. You press softly, but they deflect. You let it go, again and again, and at some point, your effort begins to collapse under the weight of never being met. They say they appreciate you, but their eyes never open the way yours do. And the hurt doesn't come from rejection, it comes from emptiness. There's a man who rubs her back every night, who listens when she's upset, who whispers, "I love you," before bed. But when she turns toward him with her own love, words, touch, attention, he shrinks. Not away from her, but into himself. He says, "You don't have to do that," or "I'm not used to this." And while he means no harm, it lands like refusal. Her warmth is left suspended in the air, unsheltered, and eventually, she stops offering it with the same fullness. Sometimes you express your needs in clear, loving ways. "I want to feel more held," or "I want to be met emotionally." And they listen, even say, "I hear you." But nothing changes. You sense the lack of capacity, not willingness. And that might be even more painful, knowing they aren't trying to hurt you, but they can't meet you where you are. You stop expressing needs, not because you've outgrown them, but because you're tired of watching them fall to the floor. There's the quiet devastation of holding back your affection, not because you've lost it, but because it no longer feels welcome. You still want to give, still long to pour love into them, but you begin to sense that your tenderness overwhelms them. Your presence disorients them, your offering sits untouched, and that mismatch creates a deep, gnawing loneliness. Loving someone who doesn't know how to receive the very thing you were born to give. These are the wounds of being emotionally generous in a space that only echoes, of giving beauty, vulnerability, desire, insight, and watching them land with no resonance. It's not rejection, it's not cruelty, it's simply non-receiving, and that absence is its own heartbreak. Because love, in its truest form, is not just seen, it's let in. And when it isn't, no matter how thoughtful, how perceptive, how emotionally skilled we are, our love begins to feel like music played in a soundless room. Beautiful, unheard, and unbearably alone.